If I asked you, Vince Flynn, would you torture somebody? Would you say yes?
Absolutely, unequivocally. I've said it over and over again. Enhanced interrogation works.
Best-selling political thriller author Vince Flynn today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Buell Thompson. Back in the mid-90s, a Minnesota bartender with a degree in economics and a background in business had an idea for a novel, a political thriller. He sat down and started writing it. He self-published it initially until it was picked up by a major publisher. That was Vince Flynn's first book in 1998, a book called Term Limits. Now, that launched a career in which Vince Flynn wrote over 24 books, most of them bestsellers, all fast-paced thrillers. His main character, a professional assassin that Flynn named Mitch Rapp. Now, I interviewed Vince for that first book, Term Limits, and several more over the years, including his 2009 book called Pursuit of Honor. That was a fast-paced thriller that followed up his 2008 book called Extreme Measures. He and I sat down one afternoon in the fall of 2009 to talk about the book, but as you're about to hear, the conversation sometimes turned away from just about books and book writing to some other areas. In just a moment, our conversation.
As the saying goes, if you haven't heard it, it's new to you. Here's an interview from the 30-year archive of radio personality, Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
So here now from 2009, Vince Flynn. You know, bad things happen to Washington in your books. Bad things happen in this book. Does it make you nervous when you have to come here?
Yeah, a little bit. The mind's constantly wandering. We were talking, my cell phone doesn't work. This is the only town I come to where my cell phone consistently doesn't work. And I'm forced to use landlines that may or may not be bugged. Who knows,
But I'm thinking, not just in this book, but in your others as well. I mean, you get on the subway, you get on the bus, you go past the White House, you go into Congress, and you're in your mind's eye. I wouldn't, if I were you, I wouldn't be able to keep from thinking, wow, I blew this up, or I killed somebody here. Just there's all sorts of nasty things going through your mind.
Yeah, that does happen. I mean, there are buildings I go past and I think about things that I've written about in the past, but I don't want to sound too paranoid here. And I'm fortunate that when I come to town, I don't have to do certain things, but I don't get on the metro here in D.C. and I don't get on the bus. I avoid that stuff because I don't have to, so I avoid it. There's been times where it would be more convenient if I would take the metro, but I won't do it because of some concerns.
All right, well, let's talk fiction here for a moment, because I'm assuming that we've been talking fiction up till now. Again, this book opens a few days after something really bad has happened in Washington.
Yeah, in the previous book, and that got a lot of people's attention because the way, and I don't want to give away the book in case somebody hasn't read it, but an Al-Qaeda cell is in Washington, D.C., and they have targeted in a very low-tech way 3 establishments where they feel they will get the biggest bang for their buck if they blow them up. And that book is considered to be kind of the most plausible nightmare scenario for the men and women that work in law enforcement here in town, because there's not a lot they can do to defend against it, other than to prevent these cells from getting into America in the first place.
But, and I'm trying not to give away too much myself here either, it wasn't a suicide attack?
Some of it, well, yeah. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but because there's another target that they go after, because they want to put us on our heels. They want to go after the men and women who wage the war against them, which is the National Counterterrorism Center just outside of Washington, D.C. And that, again, I don't want to give away too much. But what happens in Pursuit of Honor is the book takes off 6 days after the explosions have happened. Almost 200 people are dead, a number of senators, representatives, cabinet-level people, and a fair number of people at the NCTC. And so Rapp is approached by somebody from an intermediary from the White House who says basically, listen, we can't have any connection with you. We have to have plausible deniability, but the president would like you to go do whatever it takes to make sure that we catch these guys, because the FBI has now been hamstrung by the rule of law. They have several suspects in their possession who have lawyered up and they have immigrated to the United States and obtained U.S. citizenship. And so the FBI, they're not talking to the FBI, and the FBI doesn't know where to find these other gentlemen who have escaped, who they can't find. So thus begins the big manhunt. And in the midst of all this, Rapp is dealing with somebody at Langley who's leaking information to the press. He's dealing with a fellow teammate who is, we're not sure if he's having a crisis of conscience or a nervous breakdown because he hasn't slept. And he has seen some people that are very close to him killed, and Rapp's trying to balance it all. And one of the things I did in this book, which was real interesting, was for the first time I really gave a glimpse of the terrorists and what they're thinking and how they're operating. I always do a little bit, but this time it was more in depth, and the chase that ensues.
When you get in the mind of a bad guy, how do you keep from, as the old saying goes, looking into the abyss and falling into the dark side? I mean, you can't. In other words, you can't present him as too sympathetic a character, but you also have to make him human enough that we see him as something more than a cartoon character.
Well, it's interesting because it was the device I used in this book was to take, and I started it in the previous book, was to take Kareem and Hakeem, who had grown up together, and one is, let's just say, might have some mental health issues. And the other one is has a conscience. And as the story unfolds, the one who has a conscience begins to question what they're doing, and the one who doesn't have a conscience grows more and more maniacal with each passing page. And it becomes pretty apparent, I think, to most readers that these two are headed for a parting of ways. And of all the books I've written, this one is, I think, the most tightly plotted. A lot of stuff happens in this book that has to come together in the last fifth. And I've rarely been as pleased when I've sat down to write the ending of a book where it all just started to come together for me. Because midway through it, I'm going, how am I going to do this? How am I going to tie it all back together? And sure enough, it did. So I was thrilled.
Maybe unlike some of your other books, is this going to shock the folks back in the heartland who say, whew, boy, I'm glad that stuff only happens in New York and Washington and places that doesn't affect us?
No, I think the shock factor in this book comes in with the hypocrisy on Capitol Hill. That's the thing that, I think most Americans are most frustrated with. I was talking to Frank Luntz, the pollster, at a party a few weeks ago, and he was explaining to me that when you look at these polling numbers on how Americans feel about investigating the CIA and how they feel about whether we tortured Sheikh Mohammed or didn't torture Sheikh Mohammed, they overwhelmingly say, I don't care. I don't need to know. I don't need to know, or please do, or you know what, we're only hurting ourselves here. Let's not investigate the CIA. And so that already, it's been on sale for 2 weeks. Sales are way up, and I'm getting a lot of comments from people who are upset with Capitol Hill. Republicans and Democrats alike.
Now, if I asked you, Vince Flynn, would you torture somebody? Would you say yes?
Absolutely, unequivocally. I've said it over and over again. In fact, I've said I don't want to be called Johnny Torture. I mean, I don't want to be the guy who's always saying, torture him, torture him. But when you capture a Sheikh Mohammed, a high-value terrorist who is, by the way, and people say, well, he hasn't been tried in a court of law. We're not talking about a court of law. We're talking about a guy who hasn't signed the Geneva Convention, isn't an American citizen, has intentionally targeted civilians over and over and over. I have no empathy for this person.
After this short break, Vince Flynn debunks popular theories about torture.
AI is not just for 22-year-old coders. A lot of us older adults are drawing on our life experience to find unique and creative ways to use AI, at home or at work. Got an AI success story you'd like to share? Tap the link below to visit our YouTube channel, AI After 40, and let's keep learning together.
Now back to my 2009 conversation with author Vince Flynn.
I know Amnesty International defines torture as shouting at people. It's a very broad definition. I don't buy into that. And I don't want to say this too flippantly, but my older brother Pat tortured me every summer, waterboarded me at the pool when he drowned me, repeatedly tried to drown me over and over and over. Yes, it's not a fun experience, but you know what? I don't have any sympathy for this guy. And I'll tell you what, I'll come to an agreement that if they decide they're not going to attack civilians anymore, I won't even leave the IEDs and all that other stuff. That's that's bad enough. But if they sign on the dotted line and say we will no longer target civilians, we will only target government officials and the military, I'd say fine. If they're willing to do that, then let's take it off the table. But I think because here there's a couple of things. A, the left likes to say torture doesn't work. It's false. Enhanced interrogation works. If you talk to the people who ran the program and oversaw it at the CIA, they'll tell you all the stuff they learned from the 3 people that we waterboarded. And the second thing is they say it just creates more terrorists. Well, what I find laughable about that is having been to the area over there and understanding, how things work in Egypt and Yemen and Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Iraq and Afghanistan. These people grow up in a culture that they don't understand habeas corpus. They don't understand Miranda rights. They grow up in a society where if you're suspected of something, you get beaten first and interrogated later. So they don't look at what our CIA has done in Guantanamo as, darn it, I'm going to raise up the banner and go after them. And so the far left likes to say things like, if we just get rid of Bush and Cheney and we work through the United Nations, everything's going to be fine. That's not the case. These men, because it's all men, these Islamic radical fundamentalists are bigoted. They don't like women. They don't believe in women's rights. They don't believe in equality of races. They don't believe in any of that. Their big beef is our culture. I mean, because remember, they tried to take down the towers during the Clinton administration. They attacked 2 of our embassies, killing hundreds of people in Africa. They hit the USS Cole. They hit Air Force barracks in Saudi Arabia. The list goes on and on. They did that all during the Clinton administration. They didn't do this because of President Bush and Vice President Cheney. This thing was being planned long before those guys took office. And now that they're out of office, what are we seeing? Has Al-Qaeda surrendered? Have they waved the white flag? Has the Taliban waved the white flag? Do they want to sit down and talk? We've gone to the UN. We've done an apology tour across Europe. Things haven't gotten any better. And the problem is now is it has spread beyond. It's no longer just the cells that Al-Qaeda trained themselves. It's these splinter cells. It's these young Muslim men who are on the internet, and they are getting... They think I'm going to do it. So it's like the Zazi guy who was out in Denver buying hair supply, and then back and now we arrested a guy in Massachusetts last week. It's we have to come to the conclusion that these guys are not going to just quit if we're nice to them.
So do you think that the best way to get that kind of message across is through fiction? Or, I mean, you got enough in you. It sounds like you could write a best-selling nonfiction book.
I am thinking more and more about it because I'm so frustrated about the hypocrisy in Washington that after 9/11, all of the senators and representatives who for the last 3-4 years we've heard complain about the CIA, those same senators and representatives told the CIA after 9/11, go do whatever it takes to make sure we don't get hurt. All the leadership from both parties were briefed on everything the CIA was doing, and none of them ever said, don't do it, stop, I think it's against the law. So what do? 4 years after 9/11, the political winds start to change. They start to forget what had happened, and what do? All of a sudden they turn. It's the frog and the scorpion. It's that great fable. The scorpion says to the frog, "Give me a ride across the river." The frog says, "No, you'll sting me." And the scorpion says, "No, I won't. Then we'll both drown." Well, halfway across the river, scorpion stings the frog. They're drowning. The frog says, "Why?" And the scorpion says, "I know no other way." Those are the politicians. Those are the days we live in. Gone are the days of the statesman politician that knew how to keep their mouth shut. And for years, that Senate Intelligence Committee you couldn't get on the thing unless they felt you were someone who could be trusted with dark secrets about our national security. And now, unfortunately, would you have ever guessed in the month after 9/11 that Dianne Feinstein, 8 years later, would become the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a woman who has long hated the CIA, has long made comments like we would be better off if we just closed the doors and gotten rid of them, and now she's running the Senate Intel Committee? And what pains me the most, Bill, is if we get hit again, guess who they're going to blame? They're going to blame the CIA. And we can't let them get away with it.
At least there's some justice in your book.
Yes. Fictional justice.
We won't say whose blood is spilled, but it's good.
I think it's very satisfying. There's a lot of people who have I've been on the road for 2 weeks now who've read it and are giving me a lot of good feedback about the chapter 50 and some other moments in the book that point out and just for your little your audience can get a sneak preview of something. I'm not making a statement about pro-choice or pro-life in Chapter 50. That's not the issue. I'm making a statement about hypocrisy. In fact, I say, Rapp says, "Hey, I'm not judging you on how you sit on this position of pro-life versus pro-choice. Just don't sit here and call me a barbarian." So and your fans they'll have to read it to find out what it's about. But it's an interesting setup to think of it in such stark terms.
This interview was the last of nearly a dozen interviews that I had with Vince Flynn. He died in 2013 from prostate cancer. He was 47. Now you can get your copy of Pursuit of Honor by Vince Flynn by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 1990 interview with the creator of the Rambo character, David Morrell.
The character has almost taken on a life of his own, and I've taken to calling myself Rambo's father. And because he has grown up, as it were. The Oxford English Dictionary has officially declared Rambo as a word.
And my 1987 conversation with one of the OGs of the political thriller, Tom Clancy.
I sit down and I plug my words together and I try to tell a story. Whether I do that better or worse than anyone else is for the public to judge, not for me. I do the very best I can, and if people like it, so much the better.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, that girl. My 2014 conversation with actress Marlo Thomas.
I grew up in a time where people were always looking backward, like, oh my God, I'm 50 years old. 50 years have gone by. But I think this new reinvention generation is saying, oh my God, I've got 50 years more to go. It's forward thinking rather than backward thinking.
That's next time. Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.